want to give you an opportunity to ask questions. Whenever we talk about search committees and that process, it always engenders questions. Some of you have been through it, and so as I talk about it, you're reflecting on whether you did it right or not, and what has happened. Some of you are looking to go through it or about to go through it. So feel free, if you've got any questions, now would be a great time. Anybody want to ask anything about it? If not, we won't belabor it, but yes, sir. Right. Okay, well, when you throw in the word conviction, that that tips the bar. So every church has quirky stuff. Every church, and there's quirky stuff you won't discover till you're there. I can live with quirky stuff. It's not convictional. I want to change it ultimately. I want to get them to do something else, but I'm going to figure out a way to. One of York's rules is you try to never make them feel like you're taking anything away. You're only adding to. And so if I could figure out a way that, like, the big thing at Buck Run, they sang Happy Birthday on Wednesday nights. And if 6 people had birthdays, we were going to sing Happy Birthday 6 times. And they did this at end the service. And I had to figure out a way to end that without anybody realizing I had ended that. And I did it by changing our whole Wednesday night structure. So I could get rid of it, because I can bring it back to that old structure in the future, but we just won't stick that back in once we're no longer expecting it. When you talk about an altar call or invitation, I personally, and I'm going to talk about this later, so I won't belabor it now. I believe in giving an invitation. I think it's in general a good thing. I'm not convictional. That it doesn't have to look like that, and I'm certainly not convictional against it. I'm convictional about the way some people do it. I'm convictionally against the way some people do it. I think there's a right way to do it, a good way to do it, that just enables people to respond if they feel so led. But if you say I'm convictionally against it, again, apart from me going into the discussion of why and trying to convince you otherwise, but let me just, for the sake of the discussion now, say you're convictionally against the altar call, but they do it and they expect it, then I would say that is a classic impasse. Then you're going to have to tell them, I'm not going to do that. And that's a deal breaker. Because if it's convictional, it's a deal breaker. If it's not convictional, then it's just a quirk. And it's like, okay, I can live with this. There's going to be a certain way I do it. Like, the silent communion was convictional to me. I can't do that. That's not what communion is. It's not what it's about. I gritted my teeth that first year, let it happen because I hadn't taught on it, but by the next year it was gone. I would say if you took that approach with them, you say, okay, if you call me as your pastor, if you're convictionally against it, say, then very early on, I'm going to teach why I don't think that's good, and I'm going to make my case. Or if you are for it, you're going to make your case why you should do it. But if you're convictional, then that's not something you can hide or should hide. You need to tell them this is a bedrock conviction. Does that make sense? I'm going to talk about invitations and altar calls later. It's coming up soon. Other questions about dealing with committees? Yes, sir. Okay, I'm going to answer the second question subsequently. So I won't answer the question, but your first question was uh, about involving your wife and your kids in the transition. Honestly, um, my wife was included in some discussions with the search committee, not all, but some. My very initial meeting with them was simply dinner that she went to. In fact, I believe that that's a great thing. I recommend to committees they do that if you focus in on a candidate, here's somebody we really want to seriously consider and talk to, that your first thing should be to go to dinner together. Don't talk shop, don't talk doctrinal conviction stuff, just get to know each other. And when Robert Curry called me and said, we'd like to just take you to dinner because we'd like to meet your wife, I told him, I said, well, I'll do it, but it won't be fair to you. And he said, what do you mean it won't be fair? I said, well, once you meet Tanya, I said, you won't be sure you want me to be your pastor, but you'll be sure you want her to be your pastor's wife. And he called me the morning after that dinner, and he said, we were laughing on the way home. We said, you were exactly right. We're still not sure about you. But we definitely love Tanya. And I've been riding her coattails my whole life. Anything you can do to involve your wife in that process that is appropriate. I wouldn't, Tanya didn't come to most of the discussions with the committee. But once then, they took it to, when I became their candidate and I started doing stuff at the church and meeting with different groups and having dinner and all that, she was at all of that. And that was even before the vote. So anything you can do to include your wife and your family in that is a good thing. It's also challenging because until that vote's taken, nothing is assured. And it's hard on everybody. And it can be a challenge especially, let's say you have teenage kids. 15-year-old doesn't want to change churches. A 15-year-old's not wanting to go somewhere else. And they can have an attitude. So you got to really make sure they're on board. I wouldn't be taking a 15-year-old with an attitude to my meetings. It's not going to be helpful for them or the people. So a lot of that just goes down to your knowledge of your family and how it works best. But in my case, I was very, very comfortable with it. My boys were older when we went to Buck Run. But I really got Tanya in there as much as possible, and I think that's a healthy thing. Other questions about search committee process, the vote? All right. Well, let us move on, and now I'm going to answer. Second question he asked was, what do you do your first 3 months? And I'll tell you, there are just two ways to answer this. And I can't tell you, there's no cookie cutter answer. There's two ways of thinking. One is you don't change anything for your first year. The other way of thinking is, okay, while you're on that honeymoon, you go ahead and you put all the leadership collateral up front. You go, from the very get-go, you change what you can so that you've got it done and you've set a new pattern. Both of those things could be great, and both of them could be disastrous. It really does depend on the situation, depends on your knowledge of the situation. So when I was called to both Marion and Ashland Avenue as pastor, I had already been on the staff a while. In both of those cases, I knew the people, they knew me. So I went with changing everything right off the bat. And it worked. Both places had really pretty steady and incredible growth. At Buck Run, I learned following a legend is harder than following somebody who, let's just say, wasn't a legend. And it is. I think it's easier to follow someone who in some ways failed at the pastorate than it is following the successful pastor, the guy who defined the church in the era. It's hard to follow that guy, and you certainly don't want to come in after this guy's had an incredibly successful ministry and you go, okay, we're changing things. And people are thinking, they're thinking, why are you changing stuff? It worked. This is what made us who we are. So there's just a lot of factors here. Your knowledge of the church, their knowledge of you, their trust of you, the kind of things you're changing. If you're following a pastor, you're following a church in decline, a pastorate that really didn't succeed, wasn't long term, I'd come in guns blazing. I would tell them, man, we've got to shock the patient back to life. We got to do some things. We got to do some things quickly, and I need you to trust me, and we're going to do this. I'll also tell you, it depends on your stage of life and ministry. I'm just going to have more clout going in than a young guy. I can look at a church and say, I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. And I need you to trust me, stay on board with me, because I know how to reverse this. So hang on. You're 28 years old going into your first pastor. You don't get to do that. Nobody thinks you know what you're doing. And the truth is, you don't think you know what you're doing. Well, maybe you do, but you'll find out different. Guys, it's hard to grow a church. I don't care what anybody tells you. You hear these stories about some church planners starting a church, and within 2 years they're running 700. That will not happen to you. The chances of that happening to you are so slim. It probably will not happen to you. I know one guy, Ben Mandrell. When he went to Colorado to plant a church, I knew it would happen to Ben because I know Ben. He's one of these uniquely gifted guys that, honestly, I just think God's got his hand on him. He's got a unique personality and a set of gifts, and people rally to him, and he's done a tremendous job. I think they're running 900 or something out there at his church plant in Colorado. And that's not surprising to me. Ben is so unique and so uniquely gifted. Most guys are going to scrape and fight and claw for every inch of growth, whether it's a church plant or a replant or they're the third pastor. It's just hard to reach people and to keep them and to keep people moving the same direction. So figuring out whether or not you've got to, the patient is dying and you've got to do CPR, and it doesn't matter if you break a few ribs because that's the only way you can get the heart started, or no, this is a slow antibiotic drip. We've got to do this slowly. We just want to get things moving a little bit. We'll build relationships. That has a lot to do with who you are, who they are, their history, your immediate predecessor. And I think you're going to have to look at the situation and figure out which way to go. And obviously, it's sometimes somewhere in the middle. Not real radical change, but we're going to change some things somewhat. When I came to Ashland Avenue in 1990, it was in decline. It was in steep decline. See, I was on staff there from 80 to 87 as youth pastor and music minister. When I left in 87, Brother Range was 70 years old. The pastor was 70 years old when I left to go to seminary. And during his last 3 years there, he lost a lot of young families. He's in his 70s. A lot of people thought he was hanging on too long. And when I came back, he was 73 when he retired. In his resignation, he recommended that they call me as pastor. It took them a few months to figure out if they wanted to do that or not. But they were borrowing money, literally, from one of the deacons to pay the light bill. Church had no indebtedness, and they still couldn't make payroll. That's how bad it was. So they gave me, they said, we can't pay you more than you're making there at that church in Arkansas, which was about 1/4 the size. said, we'll match your salary, but that's the best we can do. And it was truly on life support, and I had to change things quickly. But I knew them; they knew me. There was no learning curve. I could do it, and it worked. When I came to Buck Run, I'm following a legend, and I had to do things more quickly. I had to listen to the "You're No Bob Jackson" speech over and over and over, and I just had to walk with them. I don't think I really got true leadership collateral at Buck Run for the first 7 years. It took me 7 years to really get where they're going to trust me completely. I know that because 7 years in, when we changed the bylaws, it was still controversial. Or if I brought out a bylaw change today, it just wouldn't be controversial. 7 years in, it still was. So the things, that I would tell you that you need to do is learn people's names. You need to under-commit but over-deliver. So, talk about your weaknesses and stuff, and then do things that surprise people. I'm going to tell you, the power of handwritten notes is massive. In an era of email, when you write a handwritten note on nice stationery, it doesn't have to be long. Just say, I prayed for you today. Send it to their place of work or something where they get it in front of people. And I use nice stationery with a wax seal and write that note. Well, they get that from their pastor. If you're pastoring a church of 100 people, in the course of a year, you can write just about everybody pretty easily. It's not that hard. That just endears people to you. I have people at Buck Run, like one mom posted a picture of her daughter's dorm room that had a handwritten note from me on her wall that I wrote her in high school. She took it with her to college and put it up on her wall in her dorm room. Now, that's significant to me. That blesses me. I mean, just stuff like that endears you to people, that shows you care. Tanya is just such a partner in this, making people things, dropping off little gifts. Now that I think social media makes it easier to pastor than it's ever been. People feel connected to you. You don't even have to be there. But make sure that you don't ever air grievances on social media. And, you write encouraging things. You write rah-rah, cheerful things, and just use everything at your disposal to endear people to you, to love on people, teach them the word. Try and start something in the ministry there that's never been done. Like, a simple thing I do at Buck Run is Bibles and biscuits. I'll do it tomorrow morning before coming here at 6 a.m. I'll be doing a men's Bible study at Cracker Barrel in Frankfurt. It's going to be a pretty full day tomorrow. And yet that's one way that I'm just there every month. People say, I never get to see you. Well, you can Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Come to Bibles and Biscuits. And just little things like that where you're with people and you're doing something the guy before you didn't do, and just a way to be with people, it just gets you leadership collateral. Those are the things I would do in the very, very beginning.